All right, so today we're going over 1.6. We're going to be solving an equation by factoring or solving other type of equations. For example, we have problem 1. This seems like it's something odd to figure out, so I'm just going to go ahead and subtract the 9x cubed from both sides. Now, the reason I do this is to put all the x's on the same side, which will allow me to make the equation equal to 0. So I get x to the 5th minus nx cubed equal to 0. Now, when I do that, I can take out the greatest common factor, which would be x cubed. So I'm left with an x squared minus 9 equal to 0. Now, when I do this, I have two types of answers. We have the parentheses that we can equal to 0, and then we have the x cubed that we can equal to 0. So we have x cubed is equal to 0. I can take the cube root of 0, and I get that one of my answers is x is equal to 0. Now, if I do the parentheses, we have x squared minus 9 is equal to 0. Before I keep going, this is a perfect square. So this will become x plus 3, and then x minus 3 is equal to 0. Now, why is this important? Because now I can have to separate the x plus 3 is equal to 0, and I can separate the x minus 3 is equal to 0. Subtract the 3, so I get x is equal to negative 3. Then I'll add the 3, and I get x is equal to 3. So we get three different answers. We get the answer of x minus 3, x plus 3, and x is equal to 0. If you by chance forgot or didn't notice that this was a perfect square, that's fine. If you were to have done x squared minus 9 is equal to 0, you add the 9 on both sides, and you're left with x squared is equal to 9. And when you take the square root, you end up with x is equal plus or minus 3, which is exactly the same thing we got right here. So I recommend it to FOIL it out into the perfect, to factor it out into the perfect square, just to make your life easier so you don't forget. But if you happen to do so, you will get the same answer if you follow all the steps. Now, I'm going to go ahead and start the second one. I'm going to divide everything by negative 2x. Now, why am I taking that as the common denominator or dividing it out? I take out the x in order to get an x squared, a quadratic equation inside of the parentheses. And I'm going to divide by negative 2 because they're all divisible by negative 2. The reason I chose the negative is to make sure that first x squared will be positive. So I'm going to end up with negative 2x, 3x squared, plus 10x minus 8 in parentheses equal to 0. Now I can go ahead and factor this as we know. So I'm going to end up with negative 2x. This is going to be the factors of 24 that add up to positive 10. So I'm going to do 2 and 12, for example. I can do positive 12 and negative 2. That gives us positive 10, and it gives us negative 24, which is exactly what we're looking for. So we end up with 3x minus 2, and then we end up with 3x plus 12. That's going to equal to 0. Now, you can either simplify now the 3x plus 12, or you can simplify it later. I'll show you why it's not going to matter if you do it now or you do it later. Now, if I would have do it now, I can divide this whole thing by 3. So I'm left with negative 2x is equal to 3x minus 2. Or, and x plus 4 is equal to 0. Now, I can set up all of those parentheses, including the negative 2x, equal to 0 in order to solve for it. So I would be left with negative 2x is equal to 0. 3x minus 2 is equal to 0. And then the x plus 4 is equal to 0. Now I can solve the first one by dividing by negative 2. That's going to give me x is equal to 0. I can solve the second one by adding 2 first. And I'm left with 3x is equal to 2. And then dividing by 3. So I'm left with x is equal to 2 over 3. I subtract by 4. And I'm left with x is equal to negative 4. So these are your three answers for this problem. Now, just to show you guys, it doesn't matter if you were to have simplified it now, the 3x plus 12 now or later. Because if you were to have set up 3x plus 12 is equal to 0 right there and then, you would subtract the 12, just the same steps. 3x is equal to negative 12. And when you divide by 3, you end up with x is equal to negative 4 anyway. So you will get the same answer whether you simplify first or not. Now, like you guys have been doing, you usually tend to simplify first. So it's just good to keep up with what you know. But it won't give you the wrong answer if you can't. Now here they want us to factor by grouping. So I'm just going to go ahead and group the first two, the x cubed and 3x squared, and the negative 4x minus 12. The greatest common factor in this first one is x squared. So I'm left with x plus 3. And notice how the x is positive. So because the x is positive, I will be taking out a negative. You take out a negative 4, and I'm left with x plus 3 is equal to 0. As you guys know, here we would get two different parentheses. We would get the parentheses x plus 3, which is the one that matches. And then the x squared minus 4 equal to 0. Now again, I can break up that x squared minus 4 into x plus 2, x minus 2 equal to 0. And then I set up every single parenthesis equal to 0 in order to get a final answer. So we get x plus 3 is equal to 0, x plus 2 is equal to 0, x minus 2 is equal to 0. So we will subtract 3 on both sides, and we get x is equal to negative 3. I'll subtract 2 on both sides, and I get x is equal to negative 2. I'll add the 2 on both sides, and I'm left with x is equal to 2. So here we get the three answers, negative 3, negative 2, and 2. So here I'm going to again group the 4x cubed minus 3x squared and group the negative 16x plus 12. I can take out an x squared for the first one. So I'm left with 4x minus 3. And I can take out a negative 4 again on the second. So I'm left with 4x minus 3, again equal to 0. Because the parentheses match, I'm able to do 4x minus 3. And then x squared minus 4 is equal to 0. Again, I'm going to break up the x squared minus 4. So I'm left with 4x minus 3. And that breaks into x plus 2. X minus 2 equal to 0. So I can set up all the parentheses equal to 0. So this one I'll add 3 on both sides. And I'm left with 4x is equal to 3. I'll divide by 4 on both sides. And I'm left with x is equal to 3 over 4. For the second one, I can subtract 2 on both sides, and I'm left with x is equal to negative 2. For the third one, I get to add 2 on both sides, and I'm left with x is equal to 2. So here we have x is equal to 3 over 4, x is equal to negative 2, and x is equal to 2 as our final answer. Again, if you forget to do the x plus 2x minus 2 for that x squared minus 4, you could do x squared minus 4 equal to 0. You can add the 4. You're left with x squared is equal to 4. When you take the square root, you end up with x is equal to plus or minus 2. So it will be the same thing if you separate them or not. You just cannot forget the plus or minus. I just want you to get to a final answer. Whether you break it up or not, it's up to you. Just make sure you guys remember the plus or minus. All right, so here we have an x squared minus x minus 12 is equal to 0. Factors of 12 that add up to negative 1 are 3 and 4. 4 being the negative, 3 being the positive. So it's going to be x plus 3, x minus 4 is equal to 0. We have to set each parenthesis equal to 0. So x plus 3 is equal to 0. X minus 4 is equal to 0. We subtract the 3, and we get x is equal to negative 3. And then for the other one, we add 4, and we end up with x is equal to 4. This being our answer for number 1. For number 2, there's really nothing I can do to factor this out properly, so I'm just going to go ahead and use the quadratic formula. You're welcome to use completing the square if you wish as well. I'm just going to do quadratic formula. So I'm going to get negative 4 plus or minus b squared. So 16 minus 4 times a times c over 2a. That's going to be negative 4 plus or minus 16 minus 8 over 4. That's negative 4 plus or minus square root of 8 over 4. And the square root of 8, I can break it up into 2 and 4, 2 and 2. So it's going to be negative 4 plus or minus 2 root 2 over 4. And I can simplify that one more time because every 4 becomes a 2 when I divide by 2. And that 2 becomes a 1. So our final answer here is going to be negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 2 over 2. So this will be our final answer for number 2. Now for number 3, notice we have an x4 and an x squared. Usually you have an x squared and a singular x, but because this is just a multiple of the x's, we can still work them out as if they were normal factoring. So what factors of 2 add up to negative 3? Well, negative 2 and negative 3. Negative 2 and negative 1 add up to negative 3, and they multiply to positive 2. So instead of writing x by itself, because we have doubled, I'm going to write x squared. Then I'm just going to go ahead and do minus 1, and x squared minus 2 is equal to 0. Now I can set this up as x squared minus 1 equal to 0, and x squared minus 2 is equal to 0. So when I add the 1, I end up with x squared is equal to 1. So when I take the square root, I end up with x is equal to plus or minus 1. Then if I'm solving for the other one, I'm left with x squared is equal to 2. I take the square root, and I'm left with x is equal to plus or minus the square root of 2. So here we get two different answers. And again, the x squared minus 1, you could have broken it up into x plus 1, x minus 1. But you don't need to if you don't wish. All right, for 4, we need factors of 14 that add up to 9. The factors of 14 that add up to 9 are 7 and 2, both being negative. They add up to negative 9, which is what we're looking for, and they multiply to positive 14, which is what we're looking for. So this is going to be x minus 2, x minus 7 is equal to 0. Again, I'm just going to simplify these. X minus 2 is equal to 0, and x minus 7 is equal to 0. I can add the 2 on both sides, and I'm left with x is equal to 2. For the other one, I can add 7 on both sides, and I'm left with x is equal to 7. So these are your answers for this problem. All right, for number 5, what factors add up to 24 and multiply to 144? We know those factors are going to be 12 and 12. So I can do, well, x plus 12 is equal to 0. Now notice this is the exact same parenthesis, so it's going to be x plus 12 squared. That's going to make a difference, I promise. We're going to take the root, and when we do, we get x plus 12 is equal to 0. Since 0 is neither positive or negative, you can just write 0. Then we're going to subtract the 12, and we get that x is equal to negative 12. If you would have kept it separate, that's fine too. You would have ended up with x is equal to 12 and negative 12 anyway. Just we'll get that answer twice. All right, so for 6, the first thing I'm going to do is rewrite this equation with the 1 on the other side in order so I can factor it. Now we're looking for factors of 2 that multiply to negative 2 and add up to 1. So we can do, well, 2 and 1 are the only real options. And I can put a positive 2 and a negative 1. So this will become 2x minus 1 and 2x plus 2 is equal to 0. Now the 2x plus 2, you guys can simplify it to x plus 1 if you were to divide this by 2. I'll show you why it's not going to matter as long as you simplify at the end. So I can set up one parenthesis. I can set up both parentheses equaling to 0. So I'm left with 2x minus 1 is equal to 0. And then x plus 1 is equal to 0. I'll add the 1 on both sides for the first one. I'm left with 2x is equal to 1. I'll divide by 2. And I'm left with x is equal to a half. And then for the other one, I'm going to subtract 1 on both sides, and I get x is equal to negative 1. Those would be your answers. Now, what I was mentioning, that if you forget to simplify the 2x plus 2, if I were to set it up equal to 0, I would subtract the 2. And we're left with 2x is equal to negative 2. And then when I divide by 2, I end up with x is equal to negative 1. So it's exactly the same thing as the other one if we were to have simplified first. So just keep in mind it's going to be the same. You just have to simplify to the very end in order to get the same answer. So we're looking for factors of negative 6 that add up to positive 5. So we have 6 and negative 1. Those work. So we're left with 3x plus 6 is equal to, 3x plus 6, and then x minus 1 is equal to 0. Now you put again each parentheses equaling to 0. So I'm left with 3x plus 6 is equal to 0, and then x minus 1 is equal to 0. I'll subtract the 6, and I'm left with 3x is equal to negative 6. I'll divide by 3 on both sides, and left with x is equal to negative 2. And then for the other one, I'm going to go ahead and add the 1, and I'm left with x is equal to 1. Again, this is true whether you simplify the 3x plus 6 or you don't. If you were to have simplified it, you would have been left with a parentheses as x plus 2. That when you simplify x plus 2 is equal to 0, and you subtract the 2, you end up with x is equal to negative 2, which is the same thing as we got originally. Now for the remainder of this problems, just work on them for the rest of the class period. The bell's about to ring soon, so just finish them for homework if you haven't finished it.